The Force flows through all living things, binding the galaxy together in an invisible web of energy. But not all who touch this power seek balance or peace. Some reach deeper, grasping at the shadows that lurk beneath the surface, pulling at threads of anger, fear, and ambition. These practitioners are the Sith, and their mastery of the Force represents not harmony, but domination, not peace, but passion, not life, but the power over life and death itself. Tonight, we descend into the darkness. We explore the forbidden techniques that the Jedi feared, the abilities that could reshape reality, break minds, and drain the very essence of life from the living. This is the complete chronicle of Sith Force techniques, from the ancient rituals of the Sith species to the refined cruelties of the modern Dark Lords. The origins of Sith power. Before we can understand the techniques, we must understand their source. The dark side of the Force is not simply the opposite of the light. It is a fundamentally different approach to the energy field that connects all things. The ancient Sith species, those red-skinned inhabitants of Korriban who predated the arrival of the Dark Jedi exiles, possessed an instinctive connection to what they perceived as magic. Their shamans and priests could perform feats that defied explanation, drawing on hatred and passion to fuel powers that the later Jedi would categorize as dark side techniques. But to these original Sith, there was no dichotomy between light and dark. There was only power and the will to use it. Their rituals involved elaborate ceremonies, spoken incantations in their native tongue, and physical gestures designed to focus their intent. Unlike the meditative internal practices that would later characterize Jedi Force use, Sith techniques were external, visceral, and dramatic. They required the practitioner to pour their emotions into the working, to let rage or fear or hate flow through them like a conduit for raw energy. When the Dark Jedi exiles arrived on Korriban around 6,900 years before the Battle of Yavin, fleeing their defeat in the 100-year darkness, they brought with them a different understanding of the Force. These former Jedi had rejected the limitations of the light side, had delved into forbidden techniques that their masters deemed too dangerous, too corrupting. They had discovered that through passion and conflict, they could access powers the Jedi could never imagine. The marriage between these two traditions created something unprecedented. The Dark Jedi brought structure and theory to the raw power of the Sith. The Sith species brought ancient knowledge and rituals that predated the Jedi Order itself. Together, they forged techniques that would terrorize the galaxy for millennia. Consider the fundamental difference in approach. A Jedi clears their mind, becoming a hollow vessel through which the Force can act according to its will. They surrender control, trusting in the Force to guide them. The Sith do the opposite. They impose their will upon the Force, bending it to serve their purposes. Where a Jedi might ask the Force for strength, a Sith demands it, ripping the power they need from the very fabric of reality. This philosophical distinction manifests in every technique they developed. Jedi healing works with the body's natural processes, accelerating them through gentle application of Force energy. Sith healing tears life force from one source and forcibly transfers it to another, caring nothing for the donor's survival. Jedi persuasion suggests ideas, planting seeds that might grow. Sith mind control crashes through mental defenses like a battering ram, crushing resistance and rewriting thoughts by force. The price of this power is corruption. The dark side feeds on negative emotions, growing stronger with each use, but also eroding the user's connection to compassion, mercy, and eventually their own humanity. Early Sith learned that the more they drew on these techniques, the more they needed them. The darkness became addictive, a hunger that could never be truly satisfied. Yet for those willing to pay the price, the rewards were immense. Sith could accomplish in moments what took Jedi years of training. They could extend their lives far beyond natural limits. They could reshape flesh and stone. They could peer into minds and futures. They could kill with a thought and survive wounds that should have been fatal. The techniques we're about to explore represent thousands of years of dark experimentation, each one discovered by Sith who pushed the boundaries of what the Force could do. Some came from systematic study. Others emerged from desperation, from Sith Lords facing death who reached into the darkness and grasped something new. Still others were handed down through holocrons and ancient texts, preserved carefully because even the Sith recognized that some knowledge was too dangerous to lose. Sith sorcery and ancient rituals. Sith sorcery stands apart from standard Force techniques. While powers like Force push or enhanced speed draw upon the Force instinctively, sorcery requires deliberate ritual. It is the Force worked as magic, bent to specific purposes through careful preparation and precise execution. The original Sith species developed these techniques over centuries, creating a complex system of spells that required three components: spoken words of power, physical gestures to direct energy, and often physical objects to serve as focuses or repositories. When the Dark Jedi exiles merged their understanding with this ancient tradition, they refined and systematized it, creating a magical discipline as rigorous as any Jedi training. The language itself carried power. Ancient Sith, the tongue spoken by the original inhabitants of Korriban, was not merely a means of communication. Certain phonemes and word combinations resonated with the dark side, creating patterns in the Force that could be shaped and directed. A Sith sorcerer reciting an incantation wasn't simply speaking. They were imposing their will on reality through carefully structured sound. One of the most ancient and terrible spells was Sutta Chwituskak, translated as Bolt of Hatred. This incantation channeled pure concentrated malice into a projectile of dark side energy. Unlike Force lightning, which emerged spontaneously from rage, the bolt of hatred required careful preparation. The sorcerer would spend hours meditating on everything they hated, building a reservoir of pure loathing within themselves. They would then recite the incantation while performing specific hand gestures, releasing all that accumulated hatred at once in a devastating blast. Witnesses who survived encounters with this spell described it as feeling wrong on a fundamental level. The bolt wasn't simply destructive energy, it carried with it the emotional weight of genuine hatred, slamming into its target's mind and body simultaneously. Victims reported feeling violated, contaminated by the sheer malice contained in the attack. Some never recovered psychologically, haunted by the echo of that concentrated hatred for the rest of their lives. Another foundational spell was Odojinya, the dark side web. This complex working created a literal net of dark side energy that could entrap opponents. The sorcerer would trace intricate patterns in the air while speaking the incantation, weaving strands of Force energy into an imprisoning mesh. Once complete, the web would shoot forward, wrapping around its target and binding them utterly. But the dark side web did more than physically restrain. Each strand of the web drained the victim's connection to the Force, cutting them off from their own power. For Force-sensitive individuals, this was torture beyond physical pain. Imagine being able to sense the Force your entire life, only to suddenly find that connection severed. The web also leached stamina, leaving victims exhausted and helpless even as it cut into their flesh. Kazoi Kiantuska, suppressed thought, represented one of the most insidious applications of Sith sorcery. This spell didn't attack the body or even the mind directly. Instead, it suppressed the target's ability to think clearly, to form coherent thoughts, or make rational decisions. Victims described it as drowning in mental fog, unable to concentrate on anything for more than a few seconds. The Sith used this spell primarily for interrogation and control. A victim under the influence of suppressed thought couldn't maintain mental defenses, couldn't lie convincingly, couldn't even remember what they've been trying to hide. They existed in a state of confused vulnerability, their thoughts too scattered to resist questioning. The truly terrifying aspect was that the spell left no physical trace. A victim might not even realize they'd been affected until hours later, when the fog finally lifted. Duomutsiksa, the summon demon spell, ventured into even darker territory. This ritual called forth creatures from the depths of the dark side, manifesting entities of pure, malevolent energy. The demon wasn't a living being in any conventional sense. It was concentrated dark side power given temporary form, a weapon that existed only to destroy. The summoning required extensive preparation. The sorcerer needed to create a ritual space, marking out specific symbols and gathering objects steeped in dark side energy. They would fast for days, clearing their mind of everything except their purpose. When the time came, they would recite the incantation for hours, their voice growing hoarse as they poured more and more of their own life force into the summoning. If successful, the demon would tear through the barrier between the living force and the realm of pure dark side energy. It appeared as a writhing shadow, vaguely humanoid but constantly shifting, with eyes that glowed like dying stars. The demon obeyed its summoner's commands absolutely, attacking whatever targets they designated with savage fury. But maintaining the demon required constant concentration and continued sacrifice of the summoner's own vitality. Few Sith could sustain a demon for more than minutes, and the effort left them weakened for days afterward. Perhaps the most disturbing spell in the ancient Sith repertoire was Tsaiwinoka Hoyakut, reanimated dead. This necromantic working violated the natural boundary between life and death, pulling corpses back into a horrifying parody of life. The spell could be performed on fresh corpses or ancient skeletons, though the process differed slightly. For recent dead, the sorcerer would place their hands on the corpse and recite the incantation, forcing their will into the empty vessel. Dark side energy would flood into the corpse, reanimating muscles and nerves, creating an undead creature bound to the sorcerer's commands. These reanimated dead were not the shambling zombies of popular imagination. Sith necromancy produced tireless, relentless hunters who felt no pain and knew no fear. They were impervious to most conventional weapons, as destroying their bodies piece by piece accomplished little when dark side energy held them together. Only complete dismemberment or overwhelming force powers could put them down permanently. More terrifying still, the reanimated dead carried a necromancy infection. Their bites and scratches transmitted dark side corruption directly into the living. Victims of these attacks found themselves slowly dying, their own life force being consumed from within. And when they died, they too rose as undead, expanding the army of corpses under the sorcerer's command. The ancient Sith Lord Darth Grouch was the acknowledged master of this technique. During Korriban's endless civil wars, Grouch assembled an army of the dead that dwarfed the living forces arrayed against him. His undead legions felt no fatigue, needed no supplies, and fought with the savage intensity of the dark side fueling every blow. Only Grouch's eventual death finally freed Korriban from his undead plague. Waves of darkness represented a different application of Sith sorcery, one designed not to destroy but to demoralize and disperse. This spell created literal visible waves of darkness that rolled outward from the sorcerer, accompanied by a deep, thunderous roar that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. The darkness itself was more than an absence of light. It was concentrated despair made manifest, carrying with it feelings of hopelessness and terror so intense that even hardened warriors broke and fled. Those caught in the waves felt their courage evaporate, their will to fight crumble. All they could think about was escape, fleeing from the unbearable wrongness of that darkness. But the psychological effects were only part of the spell's power. The waves of darkness physically disrupted the Force itself, making it difficult for enemy Force users to access their powers. Jedi caught in the waves found themselves unable to maintain their battle meditation or healing techniques. Even simple Force pushes became difficult, as if the darkness was smothering their connection to the light. The Sith employed waves of darkness primarily in large-scale battles. A single sorcerer could break entire formations, sending Republic soldiers fleeing in terror while disrupting the Jedi generals who led them. The Great Sith War saw this spell used to devastating effect, with Sith sorcerers advancing behind walls of rolling darkness that shattered enemy morale before the battle even truly began. Creating these spells required more than simply memorizing words and gestures. Each Sith sorcerer had to forge their own connection to the dark side through ritual and sacrifice. They might spend months in meditation, seeking dark side vergences where the barrier between normal reality and the realm of pure malevolent energy grew thin. They would perform rituals that deliberately called the darkness into themselves, accepting corruption in exchange for power. Many aspirant sorcerers failed at this stage, their minds breaking under the weight of the darkness they invited in. They became raving madmen, dangerous to everyone around them, but incapable of the focus required for true sorcery. Others succeeded in the initial contact, but found themselves consumed, becoming hollow vessels for dark side energy with no will of their own. Those rare individuals who maintained their sense of self while accepting deep corruption could become true Sith sorcerers, practitioners of an art that bridged the gap between the mystical and the scientific, between Force power and arcane ritual. Sith alchemy, reshaping reality. Where Sith sorcery worked through ritual and incantation, Sith alchemy operated through direct manipulation of life and matter at their most fundamental levels. This was the Force used not as energy to be shaped, but as a tool to rewrite the basic code of existence. The ancient Sith developed alchemy out of their experiments with Sith sorcery. They discovered that by maintaining certain rituals over extended periods, focusing dark side energy into living creatures or inanimate objects, they could fundamentally alter what those things were. A beast could be transformed into a monster. A sword could be imbued with properties no mundane metallurgy could achieve. A person could be reshaped into something greater or more terrible than human. The Jedi Order on Tython had practiced a primitive form of alchemy, though they called it by other names and approached it with more caution. They recognized that manipulating life at such fundamental levels required leaning into the dark side, disrupting natural balance in ways that could have unforeseen consequences. The Jedi permitted limited study of alchemy at their Temple of Science, Anil Kesh, but forbade its wider application. The Sith had no such reservations. When the Dark Jedi exiles arrived on Korriban and merged with the native Sith species, they brought refined understanding of the Force and systematic experimentation. The ancient alchemical practices of the Sith species were transformed into something far more potent and far more dangerous. The process of creating a Sith spawn, an alchemically altered creature, began with selection. The alchemist needed a suitable base organism, ideally one that already possessed traits they wished to enhance. A large predator might be chosen for its strength and aggression. A smaller creature known for cunning might serve as the foundation for an entirely different creation. Once selected, the creature would be subjected to weeks or months of alchemical treatment. The alchemist would hold it in stasis fields while channeling dark side energy through its body, forcing changes at the cellular level. They would speak incantations in the ancient Sith tongue, imposing their will on the creature's very essence. They would introduce genetic material from other species, using dark side power to force incompatible biology to merge. The suffering of the subject was not incidental to the process. Pain and fear were part of what fueled the transformation, dark emotions that resonated with the dark side energy being channeled through the creature. Some alchemists deliberately prolonged the process, drawing out the subject's agony to create more potent specimens. The results were monstrosities that defied natural law. Terentatex represented one of the more infamous examples. These hulking beasts stood taller than a Wookiee and possessed hide thick enough to resist lightsaber blows, but their most terrifying trait was their hunger for Force sensitives. Terentatex could sense Force users from great distances and possessed a natural resistance to Force powers, making them near-perfect Jedi hunters. Their thick hides weren't simple armor. The alchemical process had rendered them almost impervious to both physical attacks and Force-based assaults. Poison had no effect. Fire merely singed their skin. Even severing limbs with lightsabers proved difficult, as the creatures possessed regenerative abilities that could heal all but the most grievous wounds. Terentatex lived for centuries, growing larger and more dangerous with age. The Sith who created them intended them as weapons against the Jedi, releasing the beasts on worlds with significant Force-sensitive populations. Long after the Sith who made them died, Terentatex continued to hunt, driven by an insatiable hunger for Force users that overrode every other instinct. Battle Hydras represented a different approach to Sith spawn creation. The Sith Lord Exar Kun, during his time on Yavin 4, crafted these serpentine nightmares from native jungle creatures. Where Tarentatechs were brute force weapons, Hydras combined physical danger with dark side corruption. A battle Hydra possessed multiple heads, each capable of independent action. The creature could attack from multiple angles simultaneously, its heads striking with venomous fangs while its powerful body coiled around victims. But the venom wasn't simple poison. It carried dark side corruption with it, infecting not just the body, but the victim's connection to the Force itself. Those bitten by battle Hydras found themselves overwhelmed by negative emotions, their thoughts turning dark and violent. Jedi victims struggled to maintain their connection to the light side as the venom worked its way through their system, corrupting from within. Some fell to the dark side entirely. Others managed to resist, but were left permanently scarred, their connection to the Force forever tainted by the experience. Kun created dozens of these creatures, seeding them throughout the jungles of Yavin 4, where they bred and multiplied. Centuries later, Jedi exploring the moon still encountered battle Hydras, the dark legacy of Kun's alchemical experiments continuing to pose a deadly threat. The Massassi warriors demonstrated alchemy applied to sapient beings. These fearsome soldiers began as members of the Sith species, but successive generations of alchemical enhancement transformed them into something else entirely. They grew larger and more powerful. With each treatment, their natural connection to the dark side amplified until it became overwhelming. The process stripped away much of their higher reasoning. Massassi could follow orders and perform complex tasks, but they lost the capacity for abstract thought or independent decision-making. They existed primarily to serve their Sith masters, utterly loyal and fearless in battle. Their bodies were enhanced to withstand incredible punishment, their strength amplified to superhuman levels, and their lifespans extended far beyond normal. Nagasato brought a contingent of Massassi with him when he fled to Yavin 4 after the Great Hyperspace War. These warriors served him loyally for decades, and their descendants remained on the moon for thousands of years. Even after Sadao's death, the Massassi continued to guard his temples and tombs, their alchemically enhanced loyalty transcending even mortality. But Sith alchemy wasn't limited to creating living weapons. The forging of Sith swords represented the pinnacle of alchemical craftsmanship applied to objects. These blades were not lightsabers, but they possessed properties that made them nearly as formidable. The process began with selecting the right metal. Pure cortosis was too brittle. Regular steel lacked the necessary conductivity for dark side energy. Sith alchemists developed specific alloys, combining various metals in precise ratios while tempering them in the presence of dark side vergences. The metal itself became attuned to the dark side during this process, taking on properties no mundane metallurgy could achieve. As the blade was forged, the alchemist would work incantations into every hammer blow. They would quench the hot metal in the blood of creatures strong in the dark side. They would carve Sith runes into the blade, each symbol a channel for dark side power. The hilt would be wrapped in the hide of alchemically created beasts, providing a grip that resonated with the wielder's connection to darkness. The finished sword could resist lightsaber blows without melting or breaking. The blade could cut through materials that should have been impervious to conventional weapons. Most importantly, the sword served as a focus for its wielder's dark side powers, amplifying Force techniques channeled through it. Some Sith swords were imbued with additional properties through further alchemical work. A blade might constantly emit an aura of fear, causing all who saw it to feel instinctive terror. Another might drink the life force of those it wounded, feeding that energy back to its wielder. The most powerful Sith swords developed a form of sentience, quasi-aware entities bound within metal that whispered dark counsel to their owners. The creation of such weapons could take years. The alchemist might forge and reforge the same blade dozens of times, each iteration bringing it closer to perfection. They would test it against captured Jedi, seeing how it held up against lightsabers and force powers. Failed attempts were melted down and started over. Only when the blade met every requirement would it be considered complete. Darth Plagueis, thousands of years after the ancient Sith, pushed alchemy in new directions. His obsession with immortality led him to experiment with manipulating midichlorians, the microscopic organisms that connected living beings to the Force. Plagueis theorized that by directly influencing midichlorians, he could extend life indefinitely, heal any wound, even create life from nothing. His research was painstaking and often horrifying. He experimented on countless subjects, altering their midichlorian counts through alchemical techniques and observing the results. Most died. Some suffered fates worse than death. Their bodies warped into unrecognizable shapes as their midichlorians multiplied out of control or died en masse. But Plagueis made progress. He learned to heal himself from injuries that should have been fatal, using alchemy to restore damaged tissue and restart stopped organs. He extended his own lifespan, though the effort required constant maintenance and left him appearing far older than his actual years. He came to believe that with enough time and experimentation, he could achieve true immortality, breaking the ultimate barrier that death represented. Whether he fully succeeded remains unclear. Plagueis shared his research with his apprentice Darth Sidious, teaching the younger Sith everything he'd learned about manipulating life and death. But Sidious betrayed him before his work was complete, murdering his master in his sleep and seizing his research for himself. Sidious would go on to create his own alchemical horrors. Shadow droids, combat automata infected with dark side energy that made them far more dangerous than ordinary droids. Chrysalis beasts, creatures that underwent rapid evolutionary changes in response to threat stimuli. The Emperor even experimented with creating clones imbued with dark side power, bodies he could transfer his essence into should his original form be destroyed. The reach of Sith alchemy extended into architecture as well. Certain Sith temples were not simply buildings, but alchemical constructs designed to channel and amplify dark side energy. The walls themselves were imbued with power through years of ritual work. The stones were cut at specific angles to channel Force energy in particular patterns. The foundations were laid on dark side nexuses and strengthened through sacrificial rites. These temples became self-sustaining dark side vergences, places where the barrier between normal reality and the realm of pure dark side energy grew thin. Force sensitives who entered such temples felt the weight of accumulated darkness pressing down on them. Even mundane individuals experienced discomfort, a sense of wrongness they couldn't quite articulate. Some temples contained mechanisms powered by alchemy rather than conventional technology. Doors that opened only for those strong in the dark side, obelisks that served as focuses for dark side rituals, amplifying power exponentially. Chambers where the Force itself seemed to congeal, becoming almost tangible, allowing sorcerers to work feats impossible anywhere else. The creation of talismans and amulets represented another application of alchemy. These objects served as repositories of dark side power, allowing Sith to store energy for later use or to grant specific abilities to those who wore them. The Moor talisman stood among the most powerful such artifacts. Created by the ancient Sith, Lord Sorcerer Sin for her fellow Lord Carness Moor, the talisman granted its wearer the ability to transform other beings into mindless thralls called Raguls. These infected creatures would in turn spread the transformation through their attacks, creating armies of mutated soldiers loyal only to the talisman's wielder. But the talisman came with a price. It housed the spirit of Carness Moor himself, preserved through alchemical techniques. The spirit constantly whispered to its wearer, offering power while slowly dominating their will. Many who thought to use the talisman found themselves used by it instead, becoming vessels for Moor's ancient consciousness. Other talismans provided different benefits. One might enhance the wearer's force lightning, allowing them to channel more power without exhausting themselves. Another might grant protection against mental attacks, shielding the wearer's thoughts from Force users attempting to read or influence them. Still others served as focuses for specific spells or rituals, making complex workings easier to perform. The creation of these objects followed similar principles to Sith sword forging. The alchemist would select appropriate materials, shape them while channeling dark side energy, and then subject them to extensive ritual work to imbue them with power. The most potent amulets required sacrifices, living beings whose life force was bound into the object to serve as a power source. Alchemy also enabled the creation of poisons that affected not just the body, but the Force itself. Sith poison, mentioned in ancient texts, amplified rage and opened victims to the dark side. Even a single dose could transform a peaceful individual into a violent berserker, their connection to the light side severed by the chemical and alchemical corruption flooding their system. More insidious were poisons that attacked a victim's connection to the Force directly. A properly prepared alchemical toxin could sever that connection entirely, rendering even powerful Jedi helpless. The effect might be temporary or permanent, depending on the poison's potency and the victim's strength of will. But in combat, even a temporary severance from the Force could be fatal. The ethical implications of Sith alchemy were stark. Every creation represented a violation of natural order, life, and matter, twisted into unnatural forms to serve the alchemist's purposes. The suffering required to create Sithborn, the corruption inherent in every alchemical working, the way these creations spread darkness wherever they went. All of it spoke to the fundamental depravity of the Sith approach to power. Yet the Sith saw no problem. To them, the ability to reshape reality according to their will was the ultimate expression of power. If lesser beings suffered in the process, that merely demonstrated their weakness. If the galaxy was corrupted by alchemical monstrosities, That was proof of the dark side's supremacy. The legacy of Sith alchemy lasted for millennia. Long after the Sith who created them were dust, their alchemical works continued to terrorize the galaxy. Terrantechs hunted Jedi for thousands of years. Battle hydras infested worlds where they'd been released. Sith swords passed from hand to hand, corrupting each new wielder. Temples built through alchemy remained dark side vergences long after their creators' deaths. Even in the time of the Galactic Empire, Darth Vader sought out ancient Sith alchemical texts, studying the techniques of his dark predecessors. The Emperor continued his experiments, creating new horrors to serve his will. The one Sith under Darth Krayt combined Sith alchemy with Yuuzhan Vong, bioshaping techniques, producing hybrid nightmares that merged two terrifying traditions. Alchemy represented power without limit, constrained only by the practitioner's knowledge and willingness to pay the price in corruption and suffering. It was the Force used not to work with nature, but to dominate it, to impose will on reality itself. And in that imposition, in that fundamental violation of natural law, lay the essence of what it meant to be Sith. The art of draining life. Among all dark side techniques, few inspired more horror than Force drain and its variations. These abilities allowed Sith to sustain themselves by consuming the life force of others, to heal their own wounds by inflicting them on victims, to grow powerful by feeding on death itself. The basic principle was elegantly simple. All living things were connected to the Force, and the Force flowed through them, sustaining life. Force drain reversed that flow. Instead of energy flowing from the Force into the living being, the Sith would pull it out, draining vitality and funneling it into themselves or another target. A practitioner of Force drain would reach out through the Force, sensing the life energy of nearby beings. Then, through an act of will, they would create a connection, a channel through which that energy could flow. The victim would feel their strength leaving them, their vitality being pulled away. Weakness would spread through their body. Their connection to the Force would dim. Their very life essence would begin to unravel. The Sith performing the drain would experience the opposite. They would feel energy flooding into them, wounds healing, fatigue vanishing. They would grow stronger, more connected to the Force, gorging themselves on stolen life. The sensation was reportedly addictive, a rush of power unlike anything else. The effects on victims varied based on the intensity and duration of the drain. A brief, mild application might leave the target simply exhausted, recovering after rest. A more aggressive drain could reduce them to helpless weakness, unable to stand or defend themselves. Extended draining could be fatal, pulling so much life force that the victim's body simply shut down, unable to sustain itself. Force-sensitive individuals suffered especially badly from force drain. Not only was their life energy being stolen, but their connection to the Force was being severed in the process. Jedi subjected to this ability described it as drowning, feeling the Force slipping away from them while they remained aware enough to experience the loss. Drain life represented a more focused application of the same principle. Where basic Force drain could target multiple victims to gather energy gradually, drain life concentrated all the Sith's will on a single target, ripping their life force out in a brutal, overwhelming assault. The victim's health and vitality would be torn away in moments, transferred directly to the Sith. This technique saw frequent use in combat, A wounded Sith could restore themselves mid-battle by draining an opponent, turning their enemy's strength into their own survival. The psychological impact was almost as devastating as the physical. Opponents watched in horror as the Sith they just wounded suddenly healed, growing stronger, even as their own energy fled. Deathfield took Force drain to a horrific extreme. Rather than targeting individuals, Deathfield created a sphere of draining energy around the Sith. Everything living within that sphere, plant or animal or sapient being, would have their life force ripped away simultaneously. The Sith stood at the center of this field of death, absorbing all that stolen energy at once. Darth Bane famously used Deathfield during his battles, though the technique exhausted even him. Witnesses described watching everything around Bane simply wither and die. Grass turned brown and crumbled to dust. Trees aged centuries in seconds, their leaves falling as their trunks became hollow husks. Animals dropped dead mid-stride. People collapsed, their bodies desiccating as their life was torn away. Bane himself would emerge from these episodes looking younger and stronger, all that stolen vitality having flooded into him. But the effort required to maintain Deathfield was immense. Bane could sustain it for only brief periods before exhausting himself. The technique was a weapon of last resort, devastating but unsustainable. The dark side healing achieved through these draining techniques differed fundamentally from Jedi healing. When a Jedi healed, they used the Force to accelerate natural healing processes, working with the body to help it repair itself. This required patience and precision. Dark healing was crude by comparison, simply dumping stolen life force into damaged tissue and forcing it to regenerate. The results were often imperfect. Scars might remain, tissue might heal incorrectly, requiring additional work to set right. But dark healing was fast, could work on injuries that would kill before Jedi healing could complete, and required no meditation or preparation. A Sith could drain a nearby minion and heal a mortal wound in seconds. Some Sith developed the ability to drain Force energy specifically, rather than life force. This targeted the victim's connection to the Force directly, leaving them unable to use Force powers even if they remained physically healthy. For Force users, this was a particularly insidious attack. Their bodies might be unharmed, but they found themselves cut off from the source of their power, rendered as helpless as any mundane individual. Darth Malak demonstrated this technique during his final duel with Revan. As the battle turned against him, Malak began draining Force energy from captive Jedi he'd imprisoned in stasis pods throughout his Star Forge. The stolen Force power flooded into him, allowing him to continue fighting even as Revan struck him down again and again. Only when Revan destroyed the stasis pods, cutting off Malak's supply of Force energy, could the Dark Lord finally be defeated. But the most terrible application of draining techniques came from Force wounds, like Darth Nihilus. Nihilus wasn't merely using Force drain as a technique, he had become a living wound in the Force, a vacuum that constantly pulled at the life and Force energy around him. His mere presence drained those nearby. His will could consume entire planets. The process that created Nihilus began during the Mandalorian Wars at the Battle of Malachor V. When the mass shadow generator activated, it killed thousands in an instant, creating a catastrophic disturbance in the Force. Nihilus, present at the battle, was caught in that disturbance. The trauma severed his connection to the living force, but in the worst possible way. Instead of being cut off from the force entirely, he became a hole, an absence that hungers. From that moment, Nihilus existed only to feed. He consumed force energy constantly, requiring ever greater amounts to sustain himself. His body withered away, replaced by armor held together solely by the force. The man Nihilus had been ceased to exist. Only the hunger remained, wearing his mask and armor, stalking the galaxy in search of force sensitives to devour. When Nihilus fed, the effect was apocalyptic. He would reach out across an entire planet, his will touching every living thing. Then he would pull, draining all of it at once. Plants, animals, every person, all of them would have their life and force energy ripped away in moments. Cities would become graveyards in heartbeats. Entire civilizations would be reduced to corpses, their worlds left dead and barren. Nihilus fed on planets like Qatar, where the Jedi had gathered in secret conclave. In moments, he consumed every living thing on the surface. Thousands of Jedi, millions of civilians, every animal down to the smallest insect, all gone. Their force energy flowed into the wound that was Nihilus, briefly satisfying his endless hunger. But the satisfaction never lasted. Nihilus's consumption only made the hunger worse, the wound in the force deepening with each feeding. He wandered the galaxy like a plague, seeking Jedi and force-sensitive populations to devour. Those few who survived encounters with him described a terrible presence, a void where a person should be, an absence that pulled at reality itself. Other Sith learned lesser versions of this technique through study and practice. Darth Traya could drain the Force from multiple targets, though she lacked Nihilus's overwhelming power. Darth Sion used a different approach, fueling his undying body by feeding on the pain and death around him. The Sith Triumvirate, united under Traya, represented three different expressions of consuming others to sustain power. Kriya taught that force drain couldn't truly be taught, only gained through instinct and experience. A Sith could study the theory, understand the principles, but the ability to actually execute the drain required a particular disposition. The practitioner had to be willing to view other beings as resources to be consumed rather than individuals with inherent worth. They had to embrace the fundamental selfishness of the dark side, caring only for their own survival and power. Those who developed proficiency in force drain often found themselves changed by it. The technique required embracing a predatory mindset, seeing the galaxy as prey. Each use reinforced that perspective, making it harder to view others as anything but potential sources of power. The addiction was both psychological and physiological, the rush of stolen vitality becoming something the Sith craved more and more intensely. The Force itself seemed to remember those who drained it extensively. Places where powerful drainings occurred often became nexuses of dark side energy, the trauma of those deaths lingering for centuries. Malachor V never recovered from the mass death that created Nihilus. The planet remained a wound in the Force, a place where the barrier between life and death grew thin, where the echoes of that ancient tragedy continued to resonate. Perhaps most disturbing was the realization that force drain could be used on connections between people. The Force bound living beings together through relationships and shared experiences. A Sith who understood these connections could target them specifically, draining not just individuals, but the bonds between them. Friendships would dissolve. Love would curdle into indifference or hate. Communities held together by shared force bonds would fragment and collapse. This application saw use primarily in psychological warfare. The Sith would identify their enemies' strongest relationships and systematically drain them, isolating their opponents emotionally and spiritually. By the time physical confrontation occurred, the victims would already be weakened, cut off from the support systems that sustained them. The counter to force drain was difficult. Passive defenses helped little. The draining occurred at such fundamental levels that simple force barriers provided minimal protection. Active resistance required recognizing the drain immediately and severing the connection before significant damage occurred. This demanded both awareness and speed, reacting faster than the Sith could establish their hold. Some Jedi developed techniques specifically to resist draining. They would prepare their minds, creating mental triggers that would alert them to any attempt to draw on their life force. They would practice maintaining their connection to the Force even under stress. They would train to recognize the distinctive sensation of being drained, that subtle weakening that preceded the full assault. But even prepared Jedi struggled against masters of the technique. Darth Nihilus could drain faster than victims could react. Darth Treya's subtle approach made detection difficult until the drain was already well underway, and raw power could overcome defense. A sufficiently strong Sith could simply overpower resistance through brute force application of their draining ability. The ethical horror of force drain cannot be overstated. These techniques reduced sapient beings to fuel, to consumables valuable only for the energy that could be ripped from them. They violated the fundamental interconnection that the Force represented, turning bonds of life into channels for death. They were the ultimate expression of the Sith philosophy. Power gained through the suffering of others, existence reduced to predator and prey. Yet, from the Sith perspective, force drain was simply efficient use of available resources. The weak existed to serve the strong, even if that service meant dying to heal their master's wounds. The galaxy was harsh and unforgiving. Those who couldn't defend themselves deserved whatever fate befell them. Compassion was weakness. Mercy was foolishness. Only power mattered, and draining others to sustain that power was simply pragmatic. Combat mastery through darkness. While sorcery and alchemy represented refined applications of dark side power, Sith also developed techniques specifically for combat. These abilities allowed them to fight longer, strike harder, and survive wounds that should have been fatal. They transformed already skilled warriors into terrifying engines of destruction. Force rage, also called force fury or dark rage, channeled negative emotions directly into physical enhancement. The Sith would focus on their anger, their hate, their fear, or their pain, then allow those emotions to flood through them. The dark side would respond, filling them with inhuman strength and speed. The transformation was visible. A Sith entering force rage seemed to grow larger, more imposing. Their eyes might glow with dark side energy. The air around them would shimmer with power. Their presence would become oppressive, exuding malevolence that affected everyone nearby. Physically, the effects were dramatic. Strength increased to the point where a Sith could crush stone with their bare hands. Speed accelerated until opponents couldn't track their movements. Durability rose dramatically, allowing them to shrug off blows that should have crippled them. Pain became distant easily ignored, unable to slow them down. But Force Rage came with costs. The technique demanded total commitment to emotion, abandoning rational thought and tactical planning. A Sith in the grip of rage fought with berserker intensity, but little strategy. They became vulnerable to tricks and traps, too consumed by fury to recognize deception. The technique also burned through the user's energy rapidly. Maintaining rage-enhanced combat for more than a few minutes left even powerful Sith exhausted. When the rage finally faded, weakness crashed over them, muscles cramping, breath coming in ragged gasps. If they hadn't won the battle before exhaustion set in, they found themselves defenseless. Light side force users could theoretically access similar enhancements through different means, but doing so while maintaining rage was extremely difficult. The emotions required to fuel Force Rage pulled users toward the dark side. Jedi who attempted it found their connection to the light weakening, darkness seeping into their thoughts. Some fell to the dark side entirely, seduced by the power rage offered. Jaden Core represented one of the few examples of a light-aligned Force user who mastered Force Rage without corruption. Through intense mental discipline, Core learned to channel the technique while maintaining his connection to the light side. But his success was exceptional, requiring years of training and iron will to achieve. Darth Vader used a variant of Force Rage constantly during his years serving the Empire. His suit's life support systems were inadequate, causing him constant pain. Rather than dulling that pain, Vader channeled it, using his suffering to fuel dark side power. He existed in a perpetual state of controlled rage, drawing strength from his agony. The technique allowed Vader to compensate for his physical limitations. His cybernetic limbs were slower than flesh, less flexible, but rage-enhanced strength made them devastating weapons. His damaged lungs couldn't provide enough oxygen for sustained exertion, but dark side energy sustained him beyond normal endurance. He turned his weakness into a source of power. Darth Maul exemplified Force Rage's combat application. During his duel with Qui-Gon Jinn and Obi-Wan Kenobi, Maul's fighting style combined acrobatic brilliance with rage-fueled aggression. He moved faster than human reflexes should allow, struck with strength that drove Jedi Masters back, and fought with relentless intensity that gave his opponents no time to rest or plan. When Kenobi cut him in half, Maul's rage literally kept him alive. Normal biology said he should have died from shock and blood loss within seconds. Instead, dark side power fueled by his hatred sustained his life long enough for him to survive through Sith alchemy and cybernetic reconstruction. His rage burned so intensely that it overwhelmed mere physical death. Force lightning represented another primarily offensive dark side technique, though its application in combat differed from rage. Where rage enhanced the body, lightning projected pure destructive energy outward from the Sith's fingertips. The ability emerged from hatred and will, acting in concert. The Sith would gather their malice, their contempt for their target, and channel it through the Force. Dark side energy would crackle around their hands, then arc outward in brilliant blue-white bolts. The electricity would slam into the target with devastating force. Force lightning affected victims on multiple levels. The electrical component caused immediate physical damage, disrupting nerve function and burning flesh. The dark side energy contained in the bolts attacked the victim's force presence, making it harder for them to access their own powers. The psychological impact of being struck by living hatred manifested as electricity could break even strong wills. Darth Sidious mastered Force lightning to a degree few others achieved. His lightning could fork, striking multiple targets simultaneously. He could sustain it indefinitely, pouring endless dark side energy through his victims. He could modulate its intensity, using gentle shocks to torture or overwhelming blasts to disintegrate. During his confrontation with Mace Windu, Sidious used lightning continuously for several minutes, channeling power that should have exhausted anyone. The lightning reflected off Windu's lightsaber, scarring Sidious' face, but he never stopped generating it. Only when Anakin intervened did the assault finally end. Force lightning could destroy more than living flesh. Intense discharges could overload electronics, shut down droids, even damage starship systems. Sidious used lightning to cripple an entire starfighter during one battle, the electrical assault frying the ship's systems faster than redundancies could compensate. The technique had limitations. Force lightning required organic limbs to channel properly. The dark side energy needed to flow through living tissue to take form as electricity. Darth Vader, with his prosthetic arms, could never use Force lightning despite his immense power. If he attempted it, the electrical discharge would feed back through his cybernetics and life support systems, likely killing him. Lightsabers could deflect or absorb Force lightning, making Jedi less vulnerable to it than mundane opponents. But sustained lightning could overwhelm even a lightsaber's defenses. The blade would grow brighter as it absorbed energy, eventually becoming too bright to look at directly. If the lightning continued, the lightsaber might overload, forcing the Jedi to deactivate it or risk the crystal exploding. Force choke represented telekinesis applied with lethal intent. The Sith would reach out through the Force, sensing their target's throat, then constrict it. From meters away, they could crush a victim's windpipe, cutting off air and blood flow to the brain. The technique was precise, invisible, and horrifying. Unlike physical strangulation, Force choke couldn't be fought with hands. Victims would claw at their throats, finding nothing to grasp. Unable to stop the invisible pressure killing them, their faces would turn red, then purple. Blood vessels would burst in their eyes. They would collapse to their knees, consciousness fading as oxygen deprivation took its toll. The Sith, wielding the choke, often made a characteristic gesture, fingers curled as if physically grasping the victim's throat. This wasn't strictly necessary. The Force choke worked through will and focus, not physical motion. But the gesture helped focus intent and added to the psychological impact, making it clear who was responsible for the victim's suffering. Vader used Force choke frequently to discipline subordinates. His reputation for killing officers who displeased him, strangling them from across conference tables, spread throughout the Imperial Navy. The fear this generated actually served a tactical purpose, making personnel work harder to avoid mistakes that might attract Vader's attention. But Force choke could be resisted. Jedi and other Force sensitives could counter it, either breaking the telekinetic grip or creating Force barriers around their own throats. Strong-willed individuals could sometimes resist long enough to escape or launch counterattacks, and the technique required concentration. If the Sith was distracted or injured, the choke would fail. Force crush took telekinesis further, applying overwhelming pressure to an entire body or object. Rather than targeting a specific area, the Sith would envelope their victim in Force energy and then compress it. Bones would shatter, organs would rupture. The victim would literally be crushed by invisible force. Darth Vader demonstrated this technique when he crushed AT-ST Walker cockpits, compressing the armored chambers until the pilots inside were pulped. The metal itself couldn't resist the force pressure, crumpling like paper in Vader's telekinetic grip. Against organic targets, Force Crush was particularly brutal. Victims had moments to experience the pressure building, to feel their bones beginning to break before the technique completed its work. The psychological terror of knowing you were about to be crushed to death, combined with the physical agony of the process, made Force Crush as much a tool of intimidation as combat. Battle meditation represented a more subtle combat application of the Force, but one with strategic implications. A practitioner would enter a meditative trance, reaching out to touch the minds of allies and enemies across an entire battlefield. To allies, they would provide courage, coordination, and tactical insight. To enemies, they would spread doubt, confusion, and fear. The Sith application of battle meditation differed from the Jedi version primarily in intensity and tactics. Where Jedi battle meditation sought to subtly guide and encourage, Sith techniques dominated and commanded. Allied troops under Sith battle meditation fought with fanatic intensity, feeling their commander's will driving them forward. Enemy forces experienced crushing despair, their morale crumbling under psychic assault. Nagasato used battle meditation during the Great Hyperspace War to multiply his forces' apparent numbers. He projected illusions of entire fleets through his meditation, making Republic defenders believe they faced overwhelming odds. The psychological impact was as effective as actual numerical superiority, causing panic and disorder among Republic ranks. The technique required immense concentration and force power to sustain. A battle meditation practitioner couldn't fight directly while maintaining the trance. They needed protection, forcing them to work from command ships or fortified positions while their influence spread across the battlefield. Countering enemy battle meditation required either killing the practitioner or overwhelming their influence with one's own. Jedi battle meditation could neutralize Sith efforts, the two influences fighting for control of soldiers' minds. But if the Sith practitioner was significantly more powerful, they could overpower Jedi resistance, their dark dominance crushing lighter influence. Force speed represented another combat enhancement, though less overtly dark than rage. The technique accelerated the user's perception and movement, allowing them to react and act faster than opponents could track. To outside observers, a Force user employing speed seemed to blur, moving faster than eyes could follow. While both Jedi and Sith could use Force speed, the Sith application typically pushed further into dangerous territory. Jedi used measured acceleration, increasing their speed to useful levels while maintaining control. Sith would go faster, consequences be damned, accepting the risk of losing control if it meant overwhelming their enemies. At extreme levels of Force speed, the user could cross rooms in eye blinks, deliver dozens of strikes in seconds, dodge blaster bolts after they were fired. Combined with Force-enhanced reflexes, this made them nearly impossible to hit, able to react to threats faster than those threats could complete. But pushing speed too far courted disaster. Human reflexes and thought processes had limits. Moving faster than you could think meant acting on pure instinct. No time for strategy or caution. Sith employing maximum force speed sometimes ran head first into traps, their enhanced movement carrying them into danger before they could register and respond to it. Force deflection and related defensive techniques allowed Force users to turn aside attacks without physical barriers. A skillful practitioner could bat away blaster bolts with their hand, redirect projectiles with a gesture, or simply will incoming attacks to miss. This was the principle underlying lightsaber combat's defensive forms, applied more broadly. The Sith approach to deflection emphasized aggression. Rather than simply turning attacks aside, they would redirect them at enemies, turning incoming fire back on those who sent it. A Sith might catch a blaster bolt with the Force and send it hurtling back at the shooter, making every attack a potential threat to the attacker. At the highest levels of mastery, this technique allowed catching and redirecting even lightsaber blades. The Sith would sense the blade coming, reach out with the Force, and deflect its trajectory just enough to make it miss. This was extraordinarily dangerous. Misjudging meant being cut in half. But successful deflection could turn an opponent's own weapon against them. Force jump and levitation granted mobility that no conventional training could match. A Sith could leap dozens of meters into the air, cross vast distances in a single bound, or simply float, defying gravity through will alone. In urban combat, this allowed them to move through 3 dimensions while opponents were limited to ground level. During the Clone Wars, Sith assassins used enhanced jumping to ambush Jedi from above, dropping from buildings or cliff faces to strike before victims could react. The psychological impact of an enemy who could be literally anywhere, who could approach from any angle, including directly overhead, made them far more dangerous than their physical capabilities alone would suggest. Taken together, this combat techniques transformed Sith into walking weapons. A master who combined them all, moving with force-enhanced speed, striking with rage-amplified strength, deflecting counterattacks, jumping and levitating to control position, all while projecting force lightning or wielding a lightsaber, was a threat few could survive encountering. Mental domination and illusions. The Sith understood that physical power alone couldn't ensure control. True dominance required conquering minds and perceptions, making victims complicit in their own subjugation. The dark side offered numerous techniques for accomplishing this. Mind probe represented the most direct assault on consciousness. The Sith would force their way into a victim's mind, tearing through mental defenses to access memories, thoughts, and knowledge. Unlike Jedi mind tricks that suggested and guided, mind probe was invasive and brutal. The victim experienced this as violation on the deepest possible level. They felt the foreign presence in their mind, rifling through their most private thoughts like someone searching a house. Memories they'd tried to forget would be pulled to the surface. Secrets they'd protected their entire lives would be laid bare. The sense of powerlessness, of having one's very self exposed and examined, broke strong individuals. The technique caused physical pain as well. Victims reported feeling as though their skull was being crushed from within, pressure building behind their eyes until they thought their head would explode. Some screamed, others went catatonic, retreating into themselves to escape the agony. After a mind probe, victims were often left weakened and disoriented. The invasive presence had disrupted their thoughts, making it difficult to focus or think clearly for hours or days afterward. Some never fully recovered, their minds permanently damaged by the assault. Skilled practitioners could use mind probe subtly, extracting specific information without the victim realizing they'd been probed. They would slip into the mind gently, locate what they sought, and withdraw, leaving only a vague sense of discomfort. This allowed intelligence gathering without alerting the target that they'd been compromised. Memory walk pushed mental invasion even further. Rather than simply viewing memories, the Sith would trap the victim within their own worst recollections, forcing them to relive trauma repeatedly. The victim's sense of time would distort, minutes of torture feeling like hours or days. The Sith would select which memories to force on the victim, typically choosing the most painful, shameful, or terrifying experiences from their past. A soldier might be forced to relive watching comrades die. A parent might endure seeing their children hurt. A survivor of trauma might be trapped in the moment of their greatest suffering. The psychological damage was profound. Even after the memory walk ended, victims found themselves haunted by the memories they'd been forced to relive. PTSD symptoms emerged or intensified. Depression set in. Some victims became suicidal, desperate to escape memories that now felt more real and present than their actual lives. One particularly cruel application involved using memory walk during interrogation. Rather than asking questions, the Sith would trap victims in painful memories until they broke, begging to answer any question if it would only stop the assault. The information extracted this way was reliable. Victims would confess to anything, reveal anything, if it meant escape from their own tortured minds. Memory rub operated differently, targeting not the recall of memories, but the memories themselves. A Sith using this technique could alter, erase, or implant false memories, rewriting their victim's past. The process was delicate. Memories connected to emotions, to other memories, to sense perceptions and context. Simply deleting one memory could leave gaps that the victim would notice, prompting investigation that might reveal the manipulation. Skillful memory work required altering entire networks of recollection, adjusting connected memories to maintain consistency. False memory implantation was even more difficult. The fabricated memory had to fit seamlessly with the victim's actual past, matching their personality and life experiences. It needed emotional weight, sensory detail, all the qualities that made real memories feel genuine. A poorly constructed false memory would feel wrong, triggering the victim's suspicions. But when done correctly, memory rub could be devastatingly effective. A Sith could make someone forget they'd ever met, erase knowledge of crucial secrets, or implant false memories that changed how the victim viewed themselves and others. Relationships could be destroyed by false memories of betrayal. Loyalties could be shifted by implanting memories of kindness or cruelty from different sources. The technique saw use primarily in espionage and psychological warfare. Sith would alter the memories of captured agents before releasing them, ensuring they couldn't report accurate intelligence. They would implant false memories in enemy leaders, turning allies against each other. They would erase inconvenient witnesses, leaving them unable to testify about what they'd seen. Force fear and its more powerful variants, force horror and force insanity, weaponized terror itself. These techniques projected the victim's worst fears directly into their mind, making them experience their phobias and anxieties as if they were real. A person afraid of heights might suddenly feel they were falling, the ground rushing up to meet them. Someone with claustrophobia might experience being buried alive, tons of earth pressing down on them. Those who feared death would feel their life slipping away, darkness closing in. Force fear affected one victim at a time, intense but limited in scope. Force horror could target multiple individuals simultaneously, spreading panic through a group. Force insanity, the most powerful variant, could shatter the minds of numerous victims at once, driving them genuinely mad. The psychological wounds inflicted by these techniques could be permanent. Victims might develop crippling phobias, unable to function around reminders of the fears that had been weaponized against them. Some had complete mental breakdowns, their grip on reality permanently loosened by having their worst nightmares made real. Influence and mind control represented more subtle forms of mental domination. Where mind probe crashed through defenses and memory rub altered recollection, these techniques bent will directly, making victims want to do what the Sith commanded. Low-level influence worked like Jedi mind tricks, planting suggestions that felt like the victim's own thoughts. A guard, influenced to let someone pass, wouldn't feel controlled. They would simply decide that the person was authorized and allowed entry. The suggestion fit naturally into their thought patterns, raising no alarms. But Sith pushed influence further into true mind control. Rather than suggesting, they dominated, crushing the victim's will entirely and replacing it with their own. The victim became a puppet, their body moving and speaking according to the Sith's commands, while their consciousness remained trapped, aware but unable to act. This absolute control required continuous concentration. The Sith had to actively maintain their hold, or the victim would break free. This made mind control impractical for long-term use, but devastating in the moment. A Sith could dominate an enemy, force them to attack their own allies, then release control and move to the next target. Force illusions created false perceptions, making victims see, hear, or feel things that weren't real. Unlike memory walk, which forced real memories on victims, illusions were entirely fabricated, limited only by the Sith's imagination and skill. Simple illusions might make one person appear as another, useful for infiltration or deception. More complex illusions could create entire false environments, making victims believe they were somewhere they weren't. The most powerful illusions affected all senses simultaneously, creating experiences indistinguishable from reality. Darth Sidious and Count Dooku used Force illusions during a ritual to attack Yoda. They created the image of Darth Bane, making it appear the ancient Sith Lord had returned. Yoda recognized it as illusion, but the image still carried power, speaking with Bane's voice and seeming frighteningly real. The danger of illusions lay in their ability to make victims doubt their own perceptions. Once someone experienced a Force illusion so convincing they couldn't distinguish it from reality, they might begin questioning everything they saw. This paranoia could be as damaging as the illusion itself, making victims uncertain and hesitant. Some illusions carried real danger. An illusionist skilled enough could make the victim's mind believe the illusion was real to the point that it had real effects. Someone convinced they were burning might develop actual burns. A person who believed they'd been poisoned might experience genuine symptoms. The line between illusion and reality could blur until the distinction ceased to matter. Force madness induced genuine insanity in victims through direct dark side assault on their minds. Unlike force insanity, which projected fears, force madness attacked the structure of consciousness itself, disrupting thought patterns and perception. Victims of force madness experienced reality fragmenting around them. They couldn't trust their senses, couldn't form coherent thoughts, couldn't distinguish between what was real and what was delusion. Some became violent, lashing out at hallucinated threats. Others catatonic, retreating into themselves to escape the chaos. The technique saw little use in combat, as its effects weren't immediate. But for psychological warfare and torture, it was devastatingly effective. The threat of being driven mad, of losing one's very self, could break resistance better than physical pain. Dark side visions represented a more insidious form of mental attack. The Sith would tap into the victim's connection to the Force, feeding them visions designed to manipulate or torment. These visions felt prophetic, as if the Force itself was showing truth, making them harder to dismiss as mere illusion. Anakin Skywalker fell to this technique. Sidious fed him visions of Padme dying in childbirth, visions that felt real and true and unavoidable. The more Anakin tried to prevent the future he'd seen, the more his actions led directly toward it. A self-fulfilling prophecy, orchestrated by the Sith Lord manipulating his visions. The key to resisting mental techniques was awareness and mental discipline. Jedi trained extensively in meditation and mental defense, preparing their minds to recognize and resist invasion. They practiced clearing their thoughts, creating mental barriers, and maintaining focus under duress. But even trained Jedi could fall victim to skilled Sith. The dark side could overpower light-aligned defenses through sheer force or slip past them through cunning. The most dangerous Sith mental attacks were those the victim never realized were happening, their thoughts altered without their knowledge. Immortality and essence transfer. Death represented the ultimate limit, the boundary no amount of power could fully overcome. But the Sith refused to accept this limitation. They developed techniques to cheat death, to preserve consciousness beyond the body's failure to achieve a form of immortality. Transfer essence, also called soul transfer, was the most direct approach. The Sith would project their consciousness out of their dying body and into a new vessel, typically a body specifically prepared to receive them. The original body would die, but the mind, the self, the person would continue in their new form. The technique required extraordinary preparation. The new body had to be ready to receive the consciousness, either a clone grown for the purpose or a living person whose mind could be displaced. The transfer itself demanded perfect timing. Too early, and the original body would reject the departure. Too late, and death would claim the consciousness before it could escape. During the transfer, the Sith's spirit was vulnerable. It existed briefly outside any physical form, pure consciousness without anchor. If anything disrupted the transfer at this moment, the spirit might be lost, trapped between life and death, unable to complete its journey to the new body. Success meant effective immortality. The Sith could live one lifetime, and when that body aged or was damaged beyond repair, simply transfer to a new one. They could accumulate centuries of knowledge and power, growing stronger with each passing decade without the usual limitation of aging. Darth Vader pioneered this technique in ancient times. He spent decades perfecting it, seeking to overcome death itself. His holocron contained his teachings on essence transfer, knowledge that later Sith like Darth Bane sought desperately to acquire. Emperor Palpatine mastered essence transfer more completely than perhaps any Sith before him. He prepared numerous clone bodies on the hidden world of Exegol, each one ready to receive his consciousness. When Anakin threw him down the Death Star reactor shaft, his body was destroyed, but his spirit endured. Palpatine's consciousness traveled across the galaxy, drawn to the nearest prepared clone on Exegol. The transfer succeeded, and the Emperor lived again, albeit in a body that wasn't quite right. The cloning process couldn't fully replicate his original form, and maintaining his new body required constant effort and dark side energy. He attempted the transfer again years later, seeking to possess the body of Anakin's grandson. This time, the transfer failed. Luke Skywalker and Leia Organa's daughter Rey destroyed Palpatine completely, his body and spirit both obliterated, finally achieving the death he'd cheated for so long. Other Sith developed variations on essence transfer. Some could project their spirit into objects rather than bodies. Darth Maul, an ancient Sith, preserved his consciousness in his mask. When others wore the mask, Maul's spirit could influence and eventually possess them, using their bodies as temporary vessels. Sith amulets and weapons sometimes contained bound spirits. The Creator's consciousness would be trapped in the object at their death, either deliberately or through the trauma of dying while channeling dark side power through the item. These spirits could communicate with whoever held the object, offering guidance, manipulation, or attempts at possession. Force ghosts represented a different approach to surviving death. Unlike essence transfer, which moved consciousness to a new living body, Force ghost techniques allowed the spirit to persist without physical form. The Jedi discovered that those who achieved perfect harmony with the Force could retain consciousness after death, their spirits becoming one with the Force while maintaining individual identity. They appeared as blue-tinted, translucent apparitions able to manifest and communicate, but not to affect the physical world directly. The Sith sought similar immortality, but through characteristically different means. Their spirits weren't sustained by harmony with the Force, but by refusing to surrender to it. They held on to existence through sheer force of will, rage, and dark side power, anchoring themselves to objects, places, or sometimes just their own hatred. Darth Bane's spirit endured for a time after his death, though the exact nature of his survival remains debated. Some accounts claim he managed a form of essence transfer into his apprentice Darth Zana, his consciousness merging with hers in a battle of wills to determine whose identity would dominate their shared body. Other sources suggest he became a Force ghost, bound to places strong in the dark side. Sith spirits tended to be far less stable than Jedi Force ghosts. The dark side sustained them through negative emotions, requiring them to continuously fuel their existence with hatred and rage. Over time, this eroded what remained of their sanity and identity. Ancient Sith spirits, encountered millennia after their deaths, were often insane, barely recognizable as the individuals they'd been in life. These spirits could be incredibly dangerous. They retained their Force powers, able to influence the living, project illusions, and in rare cases, even possess those who came too close. Sith tombs remained hazardous for thousands of years due to the spirits lurking within, waiting for Force sensitives they could corrupt or consume. The creation of holocrons represented another method of achieving immortality, though a limited one. The Sith Lord would perform the rite of commencement, trapping a copy of their consciousness within a special crystal called the capstone. This cognitive essence would then be embedded in the holocron, able to manifest as a gatekeeper and teach the holocron's knowledge to future generations. The gatekeeper wasn't truly the original Sith Lord. It was more like a sophisticated recording containing their knowledge and a fragment of their personality. But the gatekeeper could think, reason, and respond to questions in ways a simple recording couldn't. From the gatekeeper's perspective, they were continuous with the Sith Lord who created them, experiencing something like immortality. Creating a holocron was extraordinarily difficult. It required gathering rare materials, spending months or years in meditation to properly construct the crystalline matrix that would store information. The rite of commencement itself was dangerous, demanding perfect focus, while the Sith split off a piece of their own consciousness to embed in the capstone. If the ritual failed, the consequences could be severe. The Sith's mind might be damaged by the attempt to divide their consciousness. The proto-holocron might degrade without the cognitive network properly established, wasting years of work. In the worst cases, the Sith might trap themselves in the incomplete holocron, their consciousness stuck between the device and their body, belonging fully to neither. But successful creation meant their knowledge would survive them. Future Sith could learn from the holocron, gaining insights that might otherwise have died with its creator. The gatekeeper could answer questions, provide guidance, and ensure the Sith's legacy endured. Dark Lord Darth Krayt used this technique to cheat death in a different way. Rather than immediately transferring his essence upon death, Krayt prepared his body through Sith alchemy and stasis techniques. When struck down by his enemies, his body didn't truly die. Instead, it entered a death-like state, held in suspension by Sith power while his spirit remained anchored to it. Years later, Krayt's spirit returned to his preserved body, reanimating it through dark side power. He rose from death, not in a clone body or through possession, but in his own flesh, restored to life through techniques that blurred the line between healing and necromancy. Life extension through dark side healing represented a more gradual approach to defeating death. Rather than seeking to survive dying, the Sith would prevent aging and injury from accumulating. They would use dark healing to repair cellular damage, remove toxins, restore tissues to youthful vitality. This required constant maintenance. The Sith had to continuously perform healings on themselves, checking for nascent problems and addressing them before they became serious. They needed sources of life force to drain, as dark healing worked by transferring vitality from elsewhere into themselves. Darth Plagueis pursued this approach obsessively. Through his understanding of midi-chlorians and dark side manipulation of life, he kept himself alive far beyond his species' normal lifespan. He looked ancient, his appearance reflecting the years he'd lived, but his body remained functional, sustained by his alchemical and healing work. The irony of Plagueis' fate was that all his efforts to defeat death were undone by simple betrayal. Sidious murdered him while he slept, killing him before he could deploy any of his survival techniques. For all his power over life and death, Plagueis died like anyone else, victim of violence he didn't see coming. The quest for immortality revealed something fundamental about the Sith. Their philosophy rejected limitations, refused to accept that anything was truly impossible. Death might be the ultimate boundary, but the Sith saw it merely as another challenge to overcome through sufficient power and will. Yet true immortality proved elusive. Even Palpatine, who came closest to achieving it, eventually failed. Every technique had limitations, flaws that skilled enemies could exploit. The Force itself seemed to resist permanent cheating of death, as if reality had rules that couldn't be entirely broken no matter how much dark side power one wielded. Destructive powers. Some Sith abilities existed purely for destruction, designed to obliterate rather than control or convert. These techniques channeled the dark side's potential for annihilation, creating effects that could devastate individuals, structures, or even entire worlds. Force destruction gathered dark side energy within the Sith's body, compressing it to incredible density, then suddenly releasing it in a massive explosion. The user would raise their hand, palm facing the target, and discharge all that accumulated power at once. The resulting detonation combined kinetic force with raw dark side energy capable of shattering stone, melting metal, and disintegrating living flesh. The technique was exhausting. Gathering enough energy for a truly devastating blast could take significant time and concentration. The discharge itself left the user drained, needing moments to recover before they could effectively fight again. But the sheer destructive power made it worth the cost in specific situations. Darth Vader's grandson, Jacen Solo, after he fell and became Darth Sidious, demonstrated force destruction during the Second Galactic Civil War. His blasts could destroy droids with a gesture, tear apart walls, and leave smoking craters where opponents had stood. The technique's visual impact, seeing concentrated dark side energy erupt from the Sith's hand, made it as much a psychological weapon as a physical one. Force Storm took destruction to apocalyptic scale, though it appeared in two distinct forms. The first created massive storms through force manipulation of weather patterns. The Sith would reach out to atmospheric systems, channeling dark side energy to create tempests of unnatural fury. These storms rained lightning, hurled winds strong enough to tear buildings apart, and darkened skies with clouds charged with malevolent power. The storms could cover entire regions, persisting for days, sowing chaos and destruction across vast areas. They were as much expressions of the Sith's rage made manifest as tactical weapons. Emperor Palpatine mastered a more terrible version of Force Storm, one that created actual wormholes in space. By tearing at the fabric of reality with overwhelming dark side power, he could open rifts that led to hyperspace. These storms didn't simply destroy their targets, they consumed them, pulling ships, buildings, and people into hyperspace where they were lost forever. The Force Storm wormhole was nearly impossible to control. Once opened, the rift wanted to expand, to consume everything nearby, including the Sith who created it. Palpatine could target them to some degree, directing where they formed and what they consumed. But maintaining control required every bit of his immense power. He used them primarily as last resort weapons when conventional force wouldn't suffice. Force Scream released accumulated emotion in a devastating sonic and psychic burst. The technique was often involuntary, emerging when a Sith experienced overwhelming rage, grief, or frustration. But skilled practitioners could deploy it deliberately, channeling their emotions into weaponized sound. The scream propagated through both physical and force space. The actual sound waves could shatter glass, crack stone, and burst eardrums. The force component carried the emotion behind the scream directly into the minds of everyone nearby, overwhelming them with whatever the Sith felt magnified to crushing intensity. Darth Vader's scream, when learning of Padmé's death, demonstrated the technique's power even when unintentional. The purely emotional outburst wrecked the medical facility around him, sending droids flying, shattering observation windows, and causing structural damage throughout the building. The sound echoed throughout the facility, permanently deafening one worker and leaving others traumatized. Exar Kun released a force scream when claiming his destiny as a Dark Lord. The scream announced his transformation to every force-sensitive in that sector of the galaxy, a declaration of dark power that reverberated through the Force itself. Jedi on distant worlds felt the disturbance, knowing instinctively that something terrible had occurred. The thought bomb represented the ultimate expression of destructive power combined with complete disregard for consequences. This technique required multiple Force users working in concert, pooling their power to create an explosion that obliterated Force sensitives across enormous areas. The process involved all participating Force users joining in meditation, linking their power together. They would channel everything they had, all their Force energy, into creating a sphere of pure annihilation. When detonated, the thought bomb killed every Force sensitive within its massive radius, destroying their bodies and trapping their spirits in the epicenter of the explosion. The trapped spirits remained conscious, aware of their imprisonment, but unable to escape or move on. They existed in torment, forever caught in the moment of their destruction. This made the thought bomb not just a weapon of mass destruction, but a form of eternal torture for its victims. Lord Khan used a thought bomb during the final battle of the new Sith Wars on Ruusan. The Brotherhood of Darkness, facing defeat, gathered together and created the largest thought bomb in history. The explosion consumed both Sith and Jedi, killing hundreds of Force users in an instant. Their spirits were trapped in the Valley of the Jedi, creating a vergence of extraordinary power that persisted for 1,000 years. The technique's fundamental flaw was that it killed the users, too. The Sith, creating the thought bomb, would die in the explosion they generated. This made it a weapon of last resort, deployed only when defeat was certain, and taking as many enemies as possible with you became the only remaining option. Nagasado's supernova technique demonstrated another apocalyptic application of darkside power. Using forbidden Sith techniques, Sado caused a star to go supernova, triggering a stellar explosion that destroyed everything in the system and created a navigational hazard that would persist for millennia. The process involved channeling immense amounts of dark side energy into the star, disrupting the delicate balance of forces that kept it stable. Fusion reactions accelerated wildly. The star's core collapsed. Within moments, the star exploded, releasing more energy than entire civilizations could generate in millennia. Sado used this technique to cover his escape after the Battle of Korriban. The pursuing Republic fleet was caught in the supernova's expansion. Many ships destroyed by the initial blast, while others were crippled by radiation and gravitational disruptions. The few that survived limped away, unable to continue their pursuit while Sato fled to Yavin 4. The technique's scale made it impractical for regular use. It required rare circumstances to set up, enormous power to execute, and carried the risk of catching the user in the explosion if they didn't escape quickly enough. But as a demonstration of what dark side power could achieve, few techniques matched the horror of watching an entire star die by the will of a single Sith Lord. Planet-killing techniques represented the ultimate endpoint of Sith destructive power. Several Sith across history developed methods to completely destroy worlds, though these varied in approach and effectiveness. Darth Nihilus could consume all life on a planet with his draining technique, leaving it a barren wasteland. Darth Vitiate performed rituals that severed entire worlds from the Force, turning them into voids where Force sensitives felt only emptiness. The ancient Sith created superweapons like the Malachor V superweapon that could destroy planetary populations. These techniques all shared a common philosophy: power without restraint, destruction as an end in itself. The Sith who developed them didn't seek merely to defeat enemies, but to demonstrate absolute dominion over life and death, showing that they had transcended all limitations, including those of morality and mercy. Stealth and deception. Not all Sith power was expressed through obvious violence. The most dangerous Sith often worked in shadows, using techniques that concealed their presence and intentions until the moment they struck. Force stealth, also called Force concealment, allowed Sith to hide their presence in the Force. When properly applied, even skilled Jedi searching specifically for dark side users couldn't detect them. The Sith would wrap themselves in a shroud of nothingness, appearing to have no more Force presence than an ordinary rock or a piece of furniture. The technique required extraordinary control. The Sith had to suppress their natural presence while maintaining enough connection to the Force to remain functional. They had to be constantly aware of their concealment, ready to reinforce it if someone probed too closely. Any strong emotion or use of obvious Force powers would disrupt the stealth, revealing them instantly. Darth Sidious maintained Force stealth for decades while serving as Supreme Chancellor of the Republic. He walked among Jedi daily, meeting with Masters of the Order, sitting mere meters from them in the Senate. Despite the Jedi actively searching for the Sith Lord they knew existed somewhere in the galaxy, none detected Sidious until he chose to reveal himself. This represented perhaps the greatest triumph of Force stealth in history. Sidious didn't simply hide in shadows. He operated openly, in plain sight, protected only by his ability to conceal what he truly was. The arrogance this required, the absolute confidence in his mastery of concealment was staggering. Foreshadow projected a quasi-physical duplicate of the Sith to distant locations. The shadow appeared as a dark, translucent version of its creator, capable of seeing and hearing, but not physically interacting with its environment. It served primarily as a method of reconnaissance and communication. Creating a shadow required significant concentration and Force power. The Sith had to maintain awareness of two locations simultaneously, their actual body and their projected presence. They saw through both sets of eyes, heard through both sets of ears. dividing their attention between two perspectives. Shadows could travel vast distances, even appearing on other planets if the Sith was powerful enough. They could slip through walls and barriers invisible to most methods of detection. Only Force sensitives had any chance of perceiving them, and even then, the shadow was difficult to sense. The Sith Sesh used Force shadow extensively for espionage. His shadows spied on enemy camps, eavesdropped on private conversations, and scouted dangerous locations without risk to his actual body. And if the shadow was detected or attacked, it would simply dissipate, forcing Sesh to create a new one, but leaving him personally unharmed. Aura manipulation allowed Sith to disguise not just their presence, but the nature of that presence. A skilled practitioner could make themselves feel like a light side user to casual Force sense, appearing to radiate peace and serenity while remaining deeply connected to the dark side. The technique saw use primarily in infiltration. A Sith could enter Jedi temples, join Republic institutions, or operate in other environments where their true nature would make them unwelcome. As long as they maintained the false aura and didn't use obviously dark side techniques, they could move freely among their enemies. Darth Zana mastered a concealment technique that created an actual light side aura around her. Jedi who examined her through the Force detected only light, interpreting her as a fellow servant of the light side. This allowed her to infiltrate Jedi strongholds, gather intelligence directly from Jedi masters, and operate with complete freedom in places that should have been most dangerous for a Sith. The maintenance of false auras was exhausting. The Sith had to constantly project the deception while suppressing their actual nature. Using dark side powers disrupted the aura, potentially revealing them. Strong emotions could crack the facade, letting their true nature bleed through. Shrouding the Force itself represented the most ambitious application of concealment techniques. Rather than simply hiding individual Sith, this approach obscured the Force's guidance for everyone, making it difficult or impossible for Jedi to use precognition or sense danger. Darth Sidious and his predecessors worked for generations to shroud the Force around Coruscant and the Galactic Senate. They created a cloud of darkness that interfered with Jedi abilities to sense the future and perceive threats. This was why the Jedi failed to foresee the Clone Wars, didn't detect Sidious despite his proximity, and walked blindly into traps that should have been obvious. The shroud wasn't a single technique maintained by one person. It was the accumulated effect of centuries of Sith working in shadow, each generation adding to the darkness, building layers of obscuration that eventually became nearly impenetrable. Maintaining the shroud required the Sith to work from specific locations, dark side nexuses where their power could be anchored and projected outward. Sidious used his office in the Senate building, a place deliberately positioned to maximize his ability to cloud the Force around the center of Republic power. The technique affected even the Jedi's most basic Force abilities. Masters found themselves unable to trust their instincts, their precognition clouded and unreliable. Visions became ambiguous, easily misinterpreted. The sense of danger that would normally warn them of threats simply didn't activate, leaving them vulnerable to attacks they should have seen coming. When the shroud finally lifted after Sidious's death, Jedi described it as feeling like a fog clearing. Suddenly, they could sense clearly again, their connection to the Force restored to what it had been before the darkness descended. The relief was immense, but so was the horror of realizing how blind they'd been, how easily the Sith had manipulated them while they stumbled through darkness. Sith artifacts and focuses. Physical objects played crucial roles in Sith techniques, serving as focuses for power, repositories of knowledge, and tools for amplifying abilities far beyond what unaided Sith could achieve. Sith holocrons were the most sophisticated of these artifacts. These pyramid-shaped devices stored vast amounts of knowledge, accessible only to those who could touch the dark side. Creating a holocron required months or years of work, gathering rare materials and performing elaborate rituals. The process began with constructing the device's crystalline matrix, a network of specially treated crystals arranged in specific geometric patterns. This matrix would hold information at densities no conventional data storage could match, capable of storing essentially unlimited knowledge. But a holocron wasn't simply a sophisticated data storage device. It contained a gatekeeper, a cognitive essence of its creator trapped within the capstone crystal. This gatekeeper could think, reason, and teach in ways a recording couldn't. It could answer questions, provide context, and guide students through the knowledge stored in the holocron. The gatekeeper had its own personality, typically mirroring its creator, but sometimes diverging. Some gatekeepers were helpful, eager to share knowledge with any who accessed the holocron. Others were capricious, deliberately withholding information or teaching in ways that encouraged failure. The most dangerous gatekeepers actively tried to corrupt those who sought their knowledge, viewing students as potential vessels for their creator's essence. Opening a Sith holocron required Force sensitivity and connection to the dark side. The device wouldn't respond to light-aligned Force users, remaining inert in their hands. But touch it with dark side power, and it would activate geometric patterns lighting up across its surface as the gatekeeper manifested. Once open, the holocron provided access to incredible knowledge. Ancient combat techniques, long-lost Force powers, the complete history of dead Sith civilizations, all preserved perfectly within the device. A single holocron could contain more Sith knowledge than entire libraries, and that knowledge remained accessible for thousands of years without degradation. Darth Bane discovered multiple holocrons during his search for Sith knowledge. Darth Revan's holocron taught him principles that would shape his creation of the Rule of Two. Darth Andidu's holocron of heresies contained forbidden techniques of immortality that Bane studied extensively. Each holocron expanded his understanding, providing insights from Sith who'd been dead for millennia. But holocrons could be dangerous to use. The knowledge they contained was powerful, and power corrupted. Students who delved too deeply into a holocron's teachings often fell further toward darkness, their identities eroded by the accumulated malevolence embedded in the device. Sith talismans and amulets served different purposes than holocrons, designed to enhance specific abilities or provide continuous effects. These objects were created through Sith alchemy, imbued with dark side power that persisted indefinitely. A talisman might increase the wearer's strength, allowing them to strike with superhuman force. An amulet could provide protection against mental attacks, shielding the wearer's thoughts from Force users attempting to read or influence them. Some enhanced Force lightning, others improved healing. Still others granted abilities the wearer didn't naturally possess. The Gauntlet of Kresh the Younger prevented anything from touching its wearer without their consent. It generated a field of dark side energy that blasted aside incoming attacks automatically, strong enough to deflect even lightsaber strikes. This protection was absolute, so long as the wearer didn't willingly permit contact. Creating such artifacts required expertise in Sith alchemy and access to appropriate materials. The base object, typically a piece of jewelry or armor, would be crafted from materials already attuned to the dark side. The alchemist would then spend weeks or months channeling dark side energy through it, permanently altering its structure at fundamental levels. Some talismans contained bound spirits, the souls of dead Sith or their victims trapped within the object. These spirits could provide guidance, offer power, or attempt to possess the wearer. The most infamous, the Moor talisman, actively sought to dominate anyone who wore it, using them as a vessel for Carness Moor's ancient consciousness. Sith swords served as both weapons and focuses for dark side power. Unlike lightsabers, these were actual blades of alchemically treated metal, but they could resist lightsaber strikes and cut through materials that should have been impervious to conventional weapons. The swords channeled their wielders' dark side power, amplifying force techniques used through them. A Sith wielding their sword could project force lightning through the blade, strike with telekinetically enhanced force, or use it to deflect incoming force powers. The sword became an extension of their will, responding to intent as much as physical motion. Darth Atrious's cross-guard lightsabers represented a later evolution of this principle, combining Sith sword design aesthetics with lightsaber technology. The cross-guard configuration, later famously used by Kylo Ren, allowed for defensive techniques impossible with standard lightsabers while paying homage to ancient Sith blade designs. The creation of Sith swords followed similar principles to other alchemical work. Master metallurgists would forge the blade from special alloys, tempering it in the blood of dark side creatures and quenching it in force nexuses. They would etch Sith runes into the metal, each one a channel for dark side energy. The finished blade would be sharper, stronger, and more potent than any mundane weapon. Some swords developed quasi-sentience over time, absorbing enough dark side energy that they gained a form of awareness. These blades would whisper to their wielders, offering tactical advice, urging violence, and slowly corrupting those who carried them. A sword that had killed many Force users might hunger for more such deaths, influencing its wielder to seek out Jedi to slay. Sith temples and structures served as architectural focuses for dark side power. These weren't simply buildings where Sith lived and worked. They were deliberate constructions designed to channel and amplify dark side energy, turning entire complexes into massive Force artifacts. The design began with location. Sith temples were built on dark side nexuses, places where the barrier between normal reality and the realm of pure dark side energy was already thin. The presence of the temple would strengthen this connection, turning a natural nexus into an even more potent vergence. Architecture played a crucial role. The layout followed specific geometric principles that directed Force energy in particular patterns. Walls were positioned at precise angles. Chambers were sized and shaped to resonate with dark side frequencies. The entire structure became a three-dimensional mandala, a physical representation of Sith philosophy rendered in stone and metal. Some temples contained mechanisms powered by the Force itself, doors that only opened for those strong in darkness, obelisks that served as focuses for rituals, multiplying the power of ceremonies performed near them, training rooms where the dark side felt more present, making it easier to learn forbidden techniques. The Malachor Sith Temple contained a superweapon powered by a massive kyber crystal. When activated, the temple would petrify all life in the surrounding area, turning living beings into stone statues. The weapon drew power from the temple's structure itself. The accumulated dark side energy of centuries channeled through the crystal in a single devastating pulse. Other temples were less overtly dangerous, but more insidiously corrupting. Simply spending time within them exposed Force sensitives to concentrated darkness, slowly eroding their resistance to the dark side. Jedi who entered seeking knowledge often emerged changed, their thoughts tinged with darkness, their connection to the light weakened. Sith scrolls and texts represented more portable repositories of knowledge. These documents contained ritual instructions, Force technique descriptions, philosophical treatises, and historical accounts written by Sith across millennia. Some scrolls were mundane, simply ink on parchment or etched into more durable materials. But the most important texts were created through processes that imbued them with power. A Sith writing a scroll describing a particularly dangerous technique might channel that technique's energy into the document itself, making it dangerous to handle. These empowered texts could corrupt readers, the dark side energy within them seeping into anyone who studied their contents. Some scrolls contained compulsions, magically enforced commands that made readers want to follow the instructions written within. Others drove readers mad, the accumulated malevolence of their content overwhelming mortal minds. The Book of Sith represented the ultimate compilation of Sith knowledge, a collection of texts from multiple ancient Sith Lords bound into a single volume. Each section was written by a different author, providing their perspective on Sith philosophy and technique. Reading the complete Book of Sith granted profound understanding of the dark side, but at the cost of deep corruption for anyone not already steeped in darkness. Masks held special significance in Sith culture, serving as both symbols of identity and as objects of power. Many Sith created masks that reflected their nature, their philosophy, or the source of their power. These masks became synonymous with their wearers, feared and recognized across the galaxy. Some masks were simply armor, protection for the face in combat, but others were crafted through Sith alchemy to provide benefits beyond physical defense. They might amplify Force powers, provide enhanced senses, or even sustain their wearer's life in hostile environments. Darth Vader's mask was the most famous example. It served multiple functions, providing respiratory support, protecting his scarred face, amplifying his voice, and enhancing his visual perception. But it was also a symbol representing the Dark Lord's power and the complete transformation of Anakin Skywalker into something else. The mask of Darth Maul contained the Sith Lord's actual spirit, trapped within it through alchemical techniques. When others wore the mask, Maul could influence and eventually possess them, using their bodies as vessels. The mask survived for generations, Maul's consciousness patiently waiting for suitable hosts. Kylo Ren's obsession with his grandfather's mask demonstrated the psychological power these objects held. Though Vader's helmet was simply burned metal and circuits, no longer functional, Ren viewed it as a connection to his grandfather's power. He believed the mask contained residual dark side energy, perhaps even echoes of Vader's spirit, guiding him toward his dark destiny. Sith wayfinders represented a specialized form of holocron designed for navigation. These devices didn't store general knowledge, but instead contained specific hyperspace coordinates, typically to hidden Sith worlds or other locations of importance. The Wayfinder to Exegol, the Emperor's hidden world, was one of only two in existence. It provided the only safe route through the treacherous hyperspace routes surrounding the planet, routes that would destroy any ship attempting to navigate them without the Wayfinder's guidance. Creating Wayfinders required both technical knowledge and force sensitivity. The device had to be attuned to specific locations, encoded with navigational data that could update itself if conditions changed. This made them extraordinarily difficult to produce and impossible to duplicate without the original creator's knowledge. Together, these artifacts represented the materialization of Sith power. Where Jedi often eschewed attachment to objects, viewing them as potential sources of distraction or corruption, Sith embraced objects as tools and focuses. They understood that power could be embedded in the physical, that knowledge could be preserved in crystal and metal, that darkness could be channeled through properly prepared items. The artifacts outlasted their creators by millennia. Long after every Sith who created them was dead, their tools remained, waiting in forgotten temples and hidden vaults. Each one was a time bomb of corruption, ready to influence or destroy whoever discovered it. And each discovery risked giving rise to new dark side users, the cycle of Sith power continuing even when the Sith themselves seemed extinct. The techniques we've explored tonight represent thousands of years of dark experimentation, each one a testament to the Sith's relentless pursuit of power without limit. From the ancient rituals of the original Sith species to the refined cruelties of modern Dark Lords, these abilities demonstrate what the Force can do when wielded without restraint or mercy. The Sith understood something fundamental that the Jedi often missed. The Force is not inherently moral. It is simply energy, potential waiting to be shaped. The Sith chose to shape it through passion and will, through anger and fear, through the dark emotions that the Jedi suppressed. In doing so, they achieved power the Jedi could never match. But this power came with a price. Every dark side technique corrupted its user, eroding compassion and empathy, turning them into something less human even as they became more powerful. The Sith accepted this trade willingly, viewing corruption not as a cost, but as transformation, shedding weakness to become stronger. Their legacy is one of destruction and tyranny, but also of incredible achievement. They conquered death, reshaped matter, dominated minds, and wielded power that could destroy worlds. They proved that with sufficient will and dark side power, even the seemingly impossible could be achieved. The Jedi called them evil, and by most definitions, they were. But the Sith called themselves free, unbounded by the limitations that constrained the Jedi. They reached for the darkness and claimed its power as their own. Consequences be damned. These techniques, these powers, these dark arts we've explored tonight represent their achievements and their crimes, their strength and their corruption. They are the reason the Sith were feared across the galaxy for thousands of years, and why their legacy continues to haunt the Force long after the last Sith Lord fell. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the dark side, please consider subscribing to Sith Lore for more explorations of the darker corners of Star Wars history. May the Force serve you in whatever way you choose to wield it.